Welcome to the Holistic Life Navigation Podcast, where we explore life through the lens of somatics. I'm Luis Mojica, a somatic educator who teaches people how to find safety in themselves. Your turn to learn begins now. Welcome, my friends. Today I bring you into the most intimate, personal place I know, my body and mind. Come along with me here as I share some magic I recently experienced. See if you can feel me and my experience along the way. Perhaps even lay down and close your eyes and receive this journey. How my instincts, my capacity, and my body led me into a really special realm. I'm in Vancouver. I flew here for an advanced somatic training called Eye of the Needle. It's a training that focuses on near-death experiences and bringing people back into their bodies after becoming so expanded that their spirit leaves the body. Essentially, we're lovingly calling back and trapping consciousness within the confines of our bones and boundaries of our skin. This is also known as embodiment. Eye of the Needle refers to the very difficult, tedious, and quick-to-escape space between consciousness and near-death. A small opening, if you will, back to this realm. An opening so small we can stay expanded in the other realm even while we exist on Earth because we don't know how to get back in. 2 weeks prior, I had gotten x-rays of my neck because something just felt off whenever I began running or exercising regularly. It turns out I have a reversal of my lordosis. The upper neck, right where it connects to my skull, is starting to reverse its curve. This is undoubtedly resulting from years of physical stress and trauma while contorting and distorting my posture to hide the breast buds that popped out from my chest as a child. It's amazing how my breasts can be gone, my emotional response to those experiences over, yet the reverberation of those events, those experiences of hiding still live within my actual bones. Remarkable. It turns out there's a specialist in Vancouver who works to help move the curve back to its original position. For me, the pinching of my neck when I lift weights causes me to experience days of strange floating sensations, you could say out of body-ish. If it continues, it turns into a migraine that can last for days. I used to experience them 2 to 3 times a week before I learned how to interrupt my fawning response, the people-pleasing reflex we go into to not rock the boat with other people. As I began embodying the response, I noticed my head would tip back and my neck would tighten. This is why I was having the chronic migraines. These migraines were literally preventing me from interacting with people or being seen, which was exactly what I needed since they came from fawning while interacting with people. Another example of the genius of these bodies, even or especially when inconvenient and painful. I showed up to the first session of the training and found myself feeling a bit otherworldly and dissociative. This is typical for me when I learn. My body easily gets overwhelmed and I take off. It caused me to do terribly in school and even drop out of college, in addition to not liking the DSM. And then a second time when I tried to major in film photography and they removed the darkroom and replaced it with a digital editing studio. I sat there in the training thinking, why am I learning about dissociation when I have so much experience in it? The first day ended and I rode my bike to the hotel, which that morning I made the discovery there was no kitchen in, only a microwave, and I was going to be there for 7 days. I thought for sure I would perish, and since I was learning about near death, I wanted the comfort of living foods in my fridge and in my body. I went to my chiropractor appointment where I was put into what looked like a medieval torture machine or someone's very kinky fantasy. And I was strapped against a chair with a 20-pound weight attached to the other end of a pulley and a Velcro around my neck and head. The idea is to spend 15 to 20 minutes like that as your vertebrae is slowly manipulated over the course of weekly sessions for 3 months, the weight pulling each piece back into place. I felt so good and aligned when it was over that I chose to do some hot yoga the next morning, and that was what would initiate me into the real Eye of the Needle. I rode my bike to the classroom and mistaken the cross street for 48, but it was actually 28. I backpedaled when I rode into a cemetery that I didn't remember being there before. I got to class late, but sat down in the midst of a lecture on working with near death. I could tell my capacity was limited, and I had some extra work to do back at the hotel, so I stayed until the afternoon and then went back to my hotel, only to leave it for a new hotel in downtown Vancouver on Hornby Street, a hotel that had a kitchen. I was shocked at Vancouver's kindness, cleanliness, and beauty. I'm used to New York City, which is almost always covered in filth, its own brand of beauty, and reeking of piss if it's warm and hasn't rained in a few days. I smoked an herbal cigarette, ate some really delicious fish, and watched the movie Civil War with Kirsten Dunst, which was more about the moral injury of journalists than it was about the actual future depiction of an American Civil War, at least for me. I woke the next morning to a cold rain and decided not to ride my bike the few miles it took to get to the training. Instead, I took an Uber. I felt out of body and necky. I went to a cafe and ordered a London fog with oat milk and no sweetener, hoping the jolt of caffeine would help my neck. A cute South American queer boy poured my cup and said, "Luis?" with delight on his face. "Luis, Luis!" As there are very few Latinos in Vancouver. One thing I love about Latinos is they never care about my skin color. They see my name and rejoice in our shared heritage regardless. I felt warm from that and walked into my training with that warmth. Yet, as I signed in, a small white spark of light suddenly erupted in my vision. This is how my migraines have always begun. The light, medically known as an aura, and spiritually as well, slowly took over my vision. I immediately walked out of the door, called another Uber and a chiropractor, and left. This other Uber driver was so kind. He turned on the seat warmers, he gave me some water, and used a slow, soft, reassuring voice which kept me more in my body. This was definitely not New York City. Miraculously, an appointment was available in that very minute, and he took me there, where I had my neck adjusted and abruptly came back into myself, into my body, back through some eye of some needle. I thought, how interesting is it that the shape of my spine compromises or supports my vitality to move through me? It's as if a kink in the spine is a kink in consciousness. I believe it may actually be. It had me thinking of a woman I met the day before. She was hunched over, distorted like many opiate addicts are, due to the stress it puts on the spine and body, and was sweeping the sidewalks. Impeccably sweeping the sidewalks. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Cleaning the streets of dope," but she said it in a voice that was more like, "Cleaning the streets of dope." And then she said, "Check this out." She slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a variety of different crystals and mysterious formations she found in the cracks of the sidewalks. She said she hands them into the cops in exchange for cigarettes. I thought, that makes sense, as I was transported to my early 20s when anything felt like a just and wealthy exchange when it involved free smokes. She reminded me of Jogger John, a local man in Woodstock who died 2 years ago. He would bless these goddamn sidewalks with his broom. He wasn't cleaning them, he was anointing them. I almost have to pick up trash whenever I pass it in his honor now. He had very little material possessions, was sometimes homeless, often moneyless, but he used his agency and power to keep our little town clean and to tell us jokes and to wax philosophical about Himalayan sea salt and all its medicinal benefits. He was a broken angel. I loved him, and this woman looked just like him, except for he wasn't on opioids, and his posture and body was pretty impeccable. I told her she was my angel of the sidewalk, and she said, "Yeah, some call me that, but my name is Kath." I told her to have a beautiful evening. As I walked back from the appointment, thinking of Kath, I couldn't help but feel for all these fentanyl addicts I was seeing on the streets of Vancouver, where it has been totally legal to use in public anywhere for many years. I sat by a boy with a curved spine who was failing, attempt after attempt, to use his small blowtorch to vaporize crack in his pipe and smoke it. I asked him if he wanted to try breathing with me instead. He said, "No. This is the thing that works for the pain. This is the only thing that works." I thought, how fucking privileged and naive and out of touch am I to think someone high on crack with a broken back would want to pause that experience to breathe with me. I've gotten way too used to the retreat centers and upper-class people who lean on my teachings. This was a whole different situation, something I haven't seen or worked with for a long, long time. I told him I loved him and walked back to my hotel where I showered and lay in bed, naked, slowly drying off and staring at the ceiling. I felt the words emerge from in my bones, and they said, "Don't go to the workshop, skip it." And then I heard the wind hit the window and it said, "You can't make somebody want to be saved." And immediately I felt a tension in my solar plexus, a nauseous pressure that I know to be guilt, the kind that immobilizes you in seconds and can cause me to binge watch or scroll for hours to avoid all the freedom and agency I actually have. So I sat with the guilt and it said, "These aren't your teachers and you know it. Do something else with your time while you're here." I teach this work all the time, so it's wonderful to use it when I actually need it. I asked the charge, the tension, the nausea what it wanted to do, and clear as day, it led me to my bike and had me hop on it. I rode intuitively into the direction from where I picked up the bike rental a few days ago, in a neighborhood that felt forgotten and spooky, known as Vancouver's East Side. The bike took me to Hastings and Main Street, otherwise known as, quote, the most dangerous block in all of Canada. Thankfully, I didn't know this at the time. As I rode there, the social landscape quickly transformed from cute metrosexual Asian boys and girls laughing and drinking matchas to decrepit, bent-over human beings scraping their crack pipes for one last puff. People bent over like books, flat on the sidewalk, dozens and dozens and dozens of them. Huge old buildings gutted out and stained with graffiti, seemingly held together by the very fragile-looking scaffolding that caressed them while people staggered, crawled, and walked around bent over as if in an internal bow to some mysterious, unseen force. I watched people light up, get high, and their faces turn from wincing agony from broken backs and broken hearts into a delighted etheric Da Vinci portrait of an enlightened being. I saw bodies frozen in time reaching up to the sky as if to touch God herself, some bent over with their fingertips touching their toes and their bare asses hanging out completely, unapologetically, without shame. Others simply laid sprawled out on staircases, some on benches, some in tents, some on top of each other in piles. Now, I've lived in several ghettos before, low-income neighborhoods with lots of crime, one of which had no lock on the front door. Yet I'd never felt as safe in those neighborhoods as I did on Hastings Street in that moment. What was beyond my comprehension was the integration of locals. I watched gorgeous women in dresses weave in and out of someone seemingly ODing on heroin without any judgment or fear of them. I watched elder Asian women coming back from the market, pushing their fresh vegetables in a cart, making eye contact and nodding to me in all of my lucidity with the same respect and care as they were to someone nodding off. I saw men on their way to work saying, "Hey, Victor," to someone who was immobile in a wheelchair, hands caked with dirt or shit, and a burnt black crack pipe dangling in his lifeless hand, ready to fall on the sidewalk and shatter. What the fuck, I thought. This is not New York City. Just then, I turned around and looked down, and there was my sidewalk angel, Kath, sleeping in the hot sun against a graffiti-stained building, 20, 30 blocks from where I first met her. I said, "Kath," and she woke right up and said, "Hey there, my friend." She asked me why I was in town, and I told her. Whenever you tell someone you're a trauma therapist, the entire relationship dynamic changes within seconds. Whether you're an Uber driver, my manager at a grocery store, someone sitting next to me on a plane, or someone hung over on the sidewalk, people are given sudden permission to speak and share anything with you. My years of being a nutritionist broke me into this strange custom when I had realized one evening while eating dinner with my wife at a little restaurant in town, where I also saw all my clients, that I knew every intimate detail of their bowel movements, genitals, and deepest secrets of nearly everyone surrounding me in the restaurant. It was at that moment I realized it's time to go global with my work. Kath went into client therapy mode with me immediately, and I realized I could actually practice the eye of the needle work with her right there on the sidewalk. She told me she had been abused by her husband, became disabled from it, addicted to opioids, and then on the street, like so many of them. Before being on the streets herself, she was a volunteer at many of the clinics and shelters in the neighborhood for people on the streets. She's played both roles. She's my kind of person. As we sat there, she said, "I was murdered 3 months ago." And I said, "And you're still here with me now?" And she laughed and said, "Someone tranked me." Trank is a powerful sedative that can kill you in minutes. It's a horse tranquilizer, essentially. Someone came up behind her and injected it into her hip. She blacked out and woke up with the paramedics over her. I asked her, as we tend to do in somatic therapy, "Where do you feel that in your body while you're telling me about it?" And she said the exact site where she was injected was suddenly lighting up. Body remembered. The body was speaking. Her tired, hungover body on the sidewalk was thawing from its freeze. It didn't seem like she had the capacity to go further, and I didn't want to activate her too much since it might cause her to use more. I gave her some money for food and told her I'd be back tomorrow. As I laid in my bed, I thought, how magical. Came here to learn about dissociation and near death. I was initiated into an out-of-body migraine because of my own contorted spine, and it propelled me away from the training and into the dirty streets of East Side Vancouver. I felt alive. I realized that these people were my teachers. I hopped on my bike the next day with a bouquet of flowers and made my way to Hastings in Maine. On the way, I passed a pro-Palestine rally. And on the way back, I passed a pro-Israel rally. I felt calm watching two different groups of people scream, cry, and demand the same thing, the right to exist. I felt them moving in my body. I felt the seduction of taking a side pour in. These poor children in Gaza, I thought, while my heart clenched with grief that only a father can imagine, much less experience. I then thought, and to be an Israeli, hated by the world only 75 years ago, and now being hated again, and I felt a compassion for the misfit, regardless of my stance on the war. I thought about how privileged we are, how safe we are, how little we as Americans have experienced such hell where your neighbors bomb you and you bomb them back. I can't imagine what that life is like. Who am I to tell either side what to do or how to feel? It would only be performative for me to do that. I prefer living in the helplessness and heartbreak of it all. And I'm holding this in my body as I pedal down Hastings Street, seeing what looks like another kind of war. A war on some of the most vulnerable people in our society, the traumatized that know no other way to extinguish their pain, the disabled and injured individuals whose doctors they entrusted with their bodies to turn them onto Oxycontin and painkillers, the impoverished youth who grew up with parents nodding off on the couch and were never told they had the capacity to outcreate what they inherited. These strange synthetic drugs pouring in from China and Mexico, a strange chemical warfare that killed over 100,000 people just last year. Where is their rally? Who speaks for them? Yes, I found myself becoming judgmental of both sides, Privileged Americans and Canadians who will never experience such atrocities, I hope, texting feverishly, shameful rants on social media, hashtagging what one country should do, what one country shouldn't, while 5 blocks away you can smell the addiction plaguing these beautiful souls on the east side while the warm wind caresses their faces and their posters. I paused and noticed I was doing the very thing I was against, picking sides and going to war in my mind and body. Freedom means you get to do what you want to do with your agency, not what I want to do. So where was my agency and power? I was using it to judge them. So I turned it around and I started pedaling my bike toward Kath. I could feel the tension against the protesters and activation as the familiar rotting smell of garbage and piss unfurled from an alley a few blocks from where Kath was lying the other day. Only this time, when I got there was nothing. Where there were dozens of bodies sleeping and frozen in place just yesterday, where there was sweet Kath with her green felt hat that she was excited to show me, was nothing but a barricade made from small street signs that said, City of Vancouver, protecting 4 chairs and a giant drum in the middle of them. I leaned against the wall. I popped open a seltzer I couldn't wait to drink, sweetened with peach juice and a touch of maple syrup. And I took off my glasses and tipped my face into the hot sun. A bright magenta bouquet of flowers in one hand, my drink in another, and a Juno Birch shirt that Marika gifted me of a yellow glove with painted red nails and the words, pause. So I paused. I waited. Part of me was wishing someone would photograph me because I thought I looked really cool, and then I got over it. I opened my eyes. Still no Kath. Instead, 4 Native Americans emerged from the shelter behind the barricade and they began hitting the drum and chanting. I stood by the bus stop, by the smell of piss in the burning sun, and listened. I stood next to them, closer, allowing the vibrations to watch over me, to move my body, to animate me. I watched a man in front of a bus stop across the street hop up and down on one foot, one sleeve of his shoulder off, the other sleeve barely covering blisters and wounds. I watched Native American men and women appear out of nowhere, following the sound and vibrations of the drums, following the songs of their ancestors. I watched a man, very high and immobilized in army fatigues, begin to move, hopping and dancing and seeing his reflection all the way across the street in some giant mirror-like windows. He started dancing with himself. I had entered a beautiful paradise of sorts, a brutal kind of raw freedom, a lawlessness I remember feeling only in New Orleans back in 2007, when gutter punks ruled the streets and squatted in the buildings that had been vacated from the flood. I thought, this is why I came here. These are my teachers. And then I left, even though I didn't want to. A trans woman walked by, smiled at me, and gave me a flirty kiss, and I gave her flirty eyes in response, and she skipped off in delight. Her style, it was identical to Hollywood lawns in Warhol's Trash, a satirical film that's really more like a documentary of the junkies in the Lower East Side in the early 70s. Warhol's attempt to capture another reality of the 60s and 70s, beyond the free love and peace and beautiful hair and bell-bottoms that we love to commercialize and limit that era to. He documented something raw. I grew up on those movies, and now I was inside of one. God damn. I still didn't want to leave, but I kept being surrounded, nearly cornered, by people smoking crack, and the vapors going right into my face. A lot of it is laced with fentanyl, and I wasn't interested in an actual near-death experience, whether it could happen or not. I suddenly felt sick, and I knew it was my body's boundary saying, get the fuck out of here. I bowed to the natives. I left them some offerings. They bowed back, completely unfazed as white vapors caressed their beautiful, tan, and pocketed skin and those wise, wide eyes. What a gift. I slowly rode my bike away, looking for Kath, and I found a Chinese woman with gorgeous hair and makeup, fully decked out in a black shiny dress, like she was going to a prom on a cruise that would never depart from here. She was sitting behind a giant barrel of cigarettes. I'm talking hundreds of packs of cigarettes in a barrel, and I felt my early 20s self jumping inside of me with excitement about smokes. She was surrounded by 20, maybe 30 people with dirty fingernails, ripped clothing, some with rotting flesh, some without any toes, some even without any feet. Some crawling, some dancing, some moaning, and some just staring at the unknown presence that one can only see under the influence of such hard chemical drugs. She was unfazed, smiling at me, her eyes twinkling, another sidewalk angel. Someone choosing to spend their time, their energy, and their capacity right here amongst the filthy, broken, innocent backs of these sweet souls that know no other way. I offered her the flowers instead, and she said, "For free? They're my favorite color." And as she took them, I thought of Kath, thought of her using her broken back, her broken skin, her broken heart to sweep the sidewalks clean, to possibly prevent someone from ODing, or to prevent some child from picking up crack rocks or touching fentanyl, to do this public service for a pack of smokes. A real hero. As I thought about it, the woman grabbed a pack and handed them to me and insisted I take them for free. I was wearing a distressed leather shirt, acid wash jeans, a big hole in my sneaker that I just can't replace because they're so comfortable, and I had my dots on my face which looked like tattoos. For all I know, she thought I was an angel of the sidewalk too. Maybe I am. I took the smokes, gave them to someone who was nodding off with their hand outstretched toward me, and rode my bike back to the hotel. I realized what being underprivileged really means, what near death really means, what out of body feels and looks like. Did I want to train about how to help someone recover from the supposed trauma of several past lives they've unearthed with a Reiki practitioner? Or did I want to spend the day with people like Kath? For me, it's the latter. No shade. We can use the reality that someone has it worse to downplay our situation and deny our feelings, or we can use it to get in touch with our gratitude and enjoy our privileges. I went back to my hotel, I took a shower, and immediately took myself out to a high-end local fish restaurant where oysters and halibut were served with braised kale and river rocks. How ridiculous. I smoked a rolled herb cigarette stuffed with lavender and Damiana. I watched the Amy Winehouse movie, which was actually quite fitting, and I luxuriated in it all. The reverberation from the protests in my mind, the smell of the alleyway before Kath's block, the feeling of absolute freedom, albeit confined and shackled to the sometimes inescapable experience of addiction, the training that called me to Vancouver in the first place, the privilege I have to do the work I do, and the privilege I have to have been blessed with a very open mind. I take no credit for this open mind, and instead, I thank whatever force continues to gift me with it. Please don't stop. I believe in using this privilege however I want, and I believe you should use your privilege however the fuck you want to. It's yours. No one gets to tell you what to do with it. Well, they do, but you don't have to listen. I sat there, just marveling at my privilege and this whole experience, bowing to the unknown magic that brought me, fascinated to see where this takes me next. And as I sat there pendulating between the protests, the war, the epidemic on Hastings Street, and my clean fingernails scraping oyster flesh from a gorgeous shell, I thought, this bitch right here has no guilt about her privileges. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.